Nestled against the backdrop of Mount Rainier and surrounded by the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, Mineral, Washington is a tiny lakeside community steeped in history and natural charm. Once a bustling centre for logging and mining, this quiet town now hosts fewer than 200 residents, but its rich past and scenic beauty remain as vibrant as ever. Just under 2 hours from both Seattle and Portland, Mineral offers a peaceful retreat into nature. From spring through fall, the lake becomes a hub for trout fishing, swimming and paddle sports, with campers and RVs lining the waterfront. Despite its small size, Mineral has big stories to tell. It's home to the country's smallest post office, a historic bed and breakfast, and is famously linked to the 1947 UFO sighting by pilot Kenneth Arnold. The Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad runs its steam train museum here, adding a touch of vintage adventure. Along the town's main stretch, visitors can explore local gems like Mineral Market, the Headquarters Tavern, the American Legion Post, and more. In the 1980s, the small, quiet town became the focus of intense media and law enforcement attention after several victims were found murdered in the surrounding wilderness with distinctive clues, including socks tied around their necks, linking the cases. On Saturday, August 10th, 1985, Stephen Harkins, aged 27, and Ruth Cooper, aged 42, embarked on a weekend camping trip to the peaceful Tule Lake area in Pierce County, Washington. The couple, who'd been in a relationship for 3 years, lived in a home in Eastside Tacoma. They also shared a love for the outdoors. Stephen worked as a truck driver for the Ed Hume Company, while Ruth, a devoted mother of 5, was employed as a crankshaft machinist. Stephen's brother described him as, quote, unforgettable in looks and personality, and, quote, very charismatic. Ruth and Stephen had attended their friends' wedding celebrations on the evening of August 10th in Tacoma before they departed for their camping trip. Located about 45 miles south of Tacoma and nearly an hour from the mountain town of Elbe, Tule Lake was meant to be a quiet getaway, but when Monday came and neither of them showed up for work at the local vocational school, concern quickly turned to alarm and their families reported them missing. On the 12th of August, a passerby, Walter Funk, noticed the couple's Volkswagen station wagon parked near Tule Lake, but thought little of it. When he drove by again on August 14th and saw the car hadn't moved, curiosity turned to concern, prompting him to take a closer look. Inside the vehicle, he made a grim discovery. Stephen Harkins's body was found in the front seat, wrapped in a sleeping bag with a gunshot wound to the forehead, suggesting he had been killed in his sleep. Their pet hunting dog had also been shot and was found roughly 800 yards from the scene. Ruth's shoes were left behind near the vehicle, but there was no sign of her. Friends and relatives recalled nothing out of the ordinary at the wedding reception when the couple were last seen, except for one unnamed wedding guest who was reportedly looking for Stephen to resolve an argument related to a motorcycle crash. However, the interaction led nowhere and produced no useful leads in the investigation. Authorities suspected that Ruth had been abducted, and her family launched a desperate search through the surrounding forest, but she was nowhere to be found. On October 26th, more than 2 months after Ruth Cooper disappeared, hunters came across a human skull near the dead end of 8th Avenue South by Hart's Lake, less than 2 miles from where Stephen had been found. Dental records confirmed that the skull belonged to Ruth Cooper. 2 days later, further searching led to the discovery of Ruth's body and her purse, concealed in thick brush just 50 feet from the initial find. She had been shot in the abdomen and, chillingly, a tube sock had been tied around her neck. The The double murder shocked the residents of Washington, and less than 2 months later, another brutal slaying would chill them to the bone. At approximately 7 a.m. on Thursday, the 12th of December 1985, 21-year-old Diana Robertson and her 36-year-old partner Mike Reamer left their home in Puyallup, Washington, with their 2-year-old daughter Crystal Louise for a trip to the forests of southern Pierce County in their 1982 red Plymouth Arrow. The couple had been together since Diana was a teenager. Mike worked year-round as a roofer and spent winters trapping animals along the Nisqually River, a stretch of wilderness between Interstate 5 and Elbe. On that Thursday morning, they set out to search for a Christmas tree and for Mike to check his trap lines. According to Mike's father, Lloyd, Mike had planned to finish the outing early so he could return to work and earn some overtime pay. Just the week before, he had borrowed gas money from his father to make the trip happen. After arriving near the banks of the Nisqually River, Mike and Diana reportedly left their daughter Crystal in the truck while they headed off to check his trapline upstream. The morning appeared to be going smoothly. Around 8 a.m, Mike stopped by Lloyd's house with Crystal for a short visit. It was still early in the day. Mike was bundled in a heavy winter coat, but Crystal wore only a light jacket. Diana wasn't with them. Neither appeared prepared for an extended trip. Lloyd offered to make them breakfast, pancakes and bacon, but Mike declined, saying they had to keep moving. It was the last time Lloyd ever saw his son. Later that day, Crystal was found alone outside the entrance of a Kmart in Spanaway, roughly 30 miles from Elbe. Disorientated and silent, the toddler showed no signs of distress, which struck store assistant manager Molly Cook as unusual. She made an announcement over the store intercom and tried to jog Crystal's memory by walking her through the toy aisles, but the child remained quiet and unresponsive. Crystal was eventually taken to a hospital for evaluation, then placed in temporary foster care. The following day, Diana and Mike were officially reported missing. 2 days later, a nurse who had treated Crystal recognised her photo during a news broadcast about the couple's mysterious disappearance. With her parents still missing, young Crystal was placed in the care of Diana's mother, Louise Conrad. The moment Crystal saw her, she lit up, reached out and called out, "Grandma," a moment of recognition and comfort amid the confusion. From that day forward, Louise became her guardian. When authorities gently questioned Crystal about what had happened, the only words she could offer were, quote, "Mummy is in the trees." Investigators noted that she was too young and limited in speech to provide more insight. Louise, however, observed a stark shift in Crystal's demeanour. She became distant, withdrawn, and noticeably unhappy when the topic of her parents came up. Louise has long believed that Crystal may have witnessed something she couldn't fully understand or express. Within days of bringing Crystal home, Louise noticed a change in her. The once carefree toddler now seemed anxious and hyper-aware, as if she were always watching for someone who might appear behind her. The weekend Mike Reamer and Diana Robertson vanished, an intense search effort unfolded across the rugged wilderness of southern Washington. Mike's best friend, Steve Chu, took to both the ground and the air, retracing the path of Mike's usual trapline route all the way to Elbe. Despite several hours of searching, he found nothing unusual. Mike's father, Lloyd Reamer, a retired state game warden, organised multiple searches in the areas his son was known to frequent. Friends and family combed roads near the Nisqually River, but the effort turned up no signs of the couple. Hoping for answers, Lloyd even hired a private investigator. The PI's most promising lead came from a Salvation Army bell ringer who remembered seeing the red Plymouth drive into the Kmart parking lot on the afternoon that Mike and Diana disappeared. However, the witness couldn't identify who was driving the vehicle at the time. Beyond that, there were no leads. Then, on February 18th, 1986, a man walking his dog off a remote logging road near State Route 7 made a grim discovery in the snowy forest near the Lewis-Pierce County line, just south of Elbe and north of Mineral. There, lying beside Mike's red 1982 Plymouth pickup truck, was Diana Robertson's partially decomposed body. Diana was naked from the waist up, had been stabbed 17 times, and had a tube sock tied around her neck with exactly the same type of knot seen previously with Ruth Cooper. Investigators believed the sock had been used to restrain her, not strangle her, and concluded she had likely been there since the day she disappeared. Despite renewed searches in the area, no trace of Mike was found. The road had been passed numerous times by Mike's family during their earlier efforts, but they hadn't checked it. Mike wasn't known to set traps there. Lloyd believed Mike's body must be nearby, but bloodhound teams found nothing. Steve Chu shared the same suspicion, that Mike was also murdered and left somewhere close, and that lingering questions about the case remain unanswered. One of those questions involves blood found in the front passenger seat of Mike's truck. Though exposure to the elements had degraded the sample, forensic investigators determined it was human blood, but its type could not be identified due to damage over time. Amid the chilling discovery of Diana Robertson's body and Mike Reamer's abandoned truck, investigators found one particularly puzzling clue: a manila envelope propped up beneath the truck's windshield with the words, "I love you, Diana," written on it. Diana's mother, Louise, believed the handwriting belonged to Mike, comparing it to the signatures on holiday cards he had given Diana in the past. However, the FBI lab was unable to definitively confirm that the handwriting was his. Detective David Nizer considered the envelope a compelling detail and questioned its purpose. Was it a farewell note left by Mike in a moment of remorse, or had someone else planted it deliberately to mislead investigators and shift suspicion? Some authorities began to suspect a deeper connection, theorizing that Diana's murder and Mike's disappearance might be linked to the double homicide of Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper that had taken place just 4 months earlier, only 15 miles from where Diana was found, in a region where Mike regularly ran his trap lines. Furthermore, the socks which had been tied around the victims' necks were noted as being identical, however they were not from the same batch. As the investigation into the murders deepened, two main theories emerged. One suggested that an unknown serial killer had targeted both couples, killing them and hiding Mike's body, while the other speculated that Mike himself could have been the killer. This theory was fueled by the fact that Mike, like Stephen Harkins, often carried a .22 caliber handgun when checking his traps, a weapon that had also been used to kill Stephen. Complicating matters further, Mike and Diana had a history of domestic violence. Friends and family reported that Mike had frequently abused Diana, and police had responded to at least 2 domestic disturbance calls between the couple. Just 2 months before Diana's death on October 19, 1985, Mike was arrested for domestic assault and malicious damage after an incident in which he allegedly kicked in Diana's apartment door, threw her to the floor and rubbed her face into the carpet. Diana managed to escape and call the police, who found visible marks on her nose and left eye. After Mike Reamer's arrest for domestic assault, Diana obtained a court order to prevent him from seeing her. However, as Christmas approached, the couple reconciled, marking what would be their final reunion. Diana's sister, Darlene, wasn't sure why Diana took Mike back, speculating that it might have been for Crystal's sake, or because Mike had provided her with some sense of security. Louise, Diana's mother, believed that Diana still loved Mike, which may have played a role in her decision to reunite with him. Detective Nizer noted that it's not uncommon for abuse victims to allow their abusers back into their lives. Diana had once told her mother, Louise, that Mike had threatened to kill her and claimed he could get away with it. While Louise initially thought these were just empty threats meant to scare Diana, in hindsight she wondered if there was more truth to it. Lloyd, Mike's father, found evidence suggesting that Mike couldn't have willingly left his truck, as he would have needed to walk several miles through harsh conditions to reach a main road. Additionally, Mike hadn't picked up his last paycheck or withdrawn money from his bank account, which led Lloyd to believe that Mike was likely killed before he could leave the area. Though circumstantial evidence exists that could implicate Mike in Diana's murder, a major legal obstacle arose. Investigators could not confirm whether Mike was alive or dead. Nizer explained that if Mike was confirmed dead, it would suggest that an unknown third party was responsible for the killings. However, if Mike was still alive, he immediately becomes a prime suspect, which would drastically change the investigation. Steve, Mike's friend, believed that Mike was prone to jealousy and anger, but didn't think he would kill over it. Mike Reamer was also eyed in connection to the earlier killings of Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper. His history of domestic violence, including past threats to Diana's life, as well as a restraining order she had briefly placed against him, contributed to the suspicion. Investigators maintained that Mike was the only individual with a known motive to harm Diana. Despite this, Mike's friends and family remained adamant about his innocence, suggesting instead that a still unknown serial killer might be responsible for all the murders. Though there was some speculation around possible motives such as drug involvement or revenge, investigators uncovered no concrete evidence supporting those theories. Since Mike's disappearance, he did not make any attempts to contact his daughter Crystal or another child from a previous relationship. While some people speculated they may have seen Mike after Diana's death, he never resurfaced. Some speculated that Mike could have been living off the land, as he was an experienced outdoorsman. It struck many as strange that whoever was responsible for the crimes chose to leave the child unharmed. Even more puzzling, Crystal was left abandoned at a Kmart, located roughly 30 miles from the remote Nisqually River, the area where Mike regularly ran his trap lines. Years later, Crystal still holds on to memories of her parents. Louise keeps a picture of Diana on her dresser, and Crystal often shows her new belongings to the photo. While Crystal has struggled with the loss, Louise believes she has done well considering the hardships. While some, including Louise and certain investigators, suspect Mike's involvement in Diana's murder, there is also the possibility that he himself is a victim. In 1989, the case of Mike and Diana was featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. While the broadcast did prompt a handful of viewer tips, none led to any significant breakthroughs in the investigation. Another name that surfaced during the investigation was Billy Ray Ballard, a convicted killer who, in 1989, pleaded guilty to murdering Edward Smith and Kimberly Levine, another couple who had vanished during a weekend trip in Grant County earlier that same year. A fingerprint found in Edward's vehicle tied Ballard to the crime. Despite the similarities between the cases, no direct link was ever established between Ballard and the Tube Sock murders. On March 26, 2011, a hiker trekking through the forest near State Route 7 in Lewis County, roughly a mile from where Diana Robertson had been discovered, stumbled upon a partial human skull. A subsequent search of the area uncovered additional remains, including a jawbone with teeth, fragments of clothing, and a rubber boot. By April, dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Mike Reamer. A weathered ID card was also found nearby, though authorities were unable to determine its owner or whether it was related to Mike. No other physical evidence has surfaced, and the exact cause of Mike's death remains unknown. Investigators ruled out a gunshot to the head, though the hiker noted a large hole in the skull. Mike's handgun was also never recovered. With his remains now confirmed, detectives suggested he too may have been murdered, potentially linking all 4 deaths to a single unidentified killer. Later that year, in November 2011, DNA evidence from the case was submitted to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for testing. Investigators also released a detailed description of the sock found tied around Diana's neck. A well-worn, white, knee-high basketball sock with dark navy blue rings at the top, tied tightly in multiple knots. In 2020, Lewis County cold case detective Pat Beal spoke on the Washed Away podcast, reaffirming that authorities still considered Mike Reamer a prime suspect in the murder of Diana Robertson. Mike had a documented history of aggression towards Diana, allegedly slashing the tires of her car and harassing her repeatedly. Diana had also been involved with another man shortly before her death, which may have further escalated tensions. Beale noted that Mike was undergoing court-ordered counselling and had been prescribed Ativan for anger management, a medication known to occasionally trigger intense outbursts. Detective Beale also revealed that the last confirmed sighting of Mike was at his father Lloyd's house the morning of the disappearances, with Crystal in tow, but without Diana. When Mike's remains were eventually found, a tree was growing right through his skull, leading investigators to conclude he had likely died around the same time he vanished. Efforts were underway to extract DNA from Mike's teeth in order to compare it to a profile recovered from the bindings used on Diana. Beale added that forensic testing was also ongoing in Stephen Harkin's and Ruth Cooper's case, though he wasn't convinced the 2 crimes were linked, especially since the tube socks used weren't from the same manufacturing batch. If the DNA does not match Mike, he said the next step would be to compare it with any genetic material recovered from the earlier double homicide. During the 1980s, Washington became infamous as a hotbed for serial killers, home to names like the Green River Killer, the Grocery Bag Killer, and the Coin Shop Killer, each earning a chilling media moniker. While some were eventually caught and brought to justice, others, like the perpetrator behind the so-called tube sock killings, remained elusive. Between 1985 and 1987, as many as 9 bodies surfaced across neighbouring counties, keeping investigators scrambling amid a surge of violent deaths. Each new murder brought fresh suspects, but as time wore on, the trail of the tube sock killer grew colder, leaving behind more questions than answers. There's no clear indication that one individual had both the motive and opportunity to murder both couples in 1985. The victims had no known connections. They didn't move in the same circles, share acquaintances, or cross paths socially. On the surface, their tragic fates seem not to be the result of a calculated link, but grim coincidence. The case remains unsolved, but the quest for justice continues.